Welcome to another round of Grammar with G. Willie. Today we're going to be talking again about integrating quotes into your essay. Let's get started. A quotation, like a pun, should come unsought and then be welcomed only for some propriety of felicity justifying the intrusion. It should be significant. It should have meaning. There are three ways to integrate quotes into your writing. The first way is through he said, she said. Second is the natural flow of your words into the author's words. And the third way is a complete sentence followed by a colon. Never a semicolon, always a colon. Notice in these examples, I have a complete sentence including my own words, as well as the author's words, the quote. My own words, the author's words, my own words, and the author's words. Always one whole sentence combining both. So my words always need to be part of that sentence in which the direct quote appears. So, as Huxley explains, here's my quote, the world state is a place in which, and that leads into my quote, and then the world state does not want a society of deep thinkers, colon, and then my quote. Each time I end with a quotation mark, the parenthetical documentation, and the period comes at the end. So I know you've noticed that the period always comes after the parenthetical documentation, but there are two scenarios in which it does not. The two scenarios are this: extended quote in a literary analysis essay or a research essay, and then, as you'll find out in the spring when we do the research essays, when you're citing the entire paragraph. So when incorporating an extended quote, you have to ask yourself, is the quote longer than 3 typed lines? If as you're typing you realize, oh my gosh, this quote is longer than 3 typed lines, then it needs to follow a different set of rules. I'll go over that in a minute. If you're citing the entire paragraph, that means all of the information in your paragraph comes from the same source. In that case, you can put your parenthetical documentation at the end of the paragraph after the last end punctuation. So you'll finish the paragraph, put a period, and then you'll put your parenthetical documentation. But about those extended quotes, there are 3 rules for them. Number 1, double indent. So we're going to tab, okay? It's not 1 indentation, it's 2 indentations, okay? We're also going to remove the quotation marks. Yeah, we're getting rid of the quotation marks. Isn't that crazy? And we're also going to position the period before the parenthetical documentation. So are you wondering what that looks like? I'm about to show you. This is what it looks like. Here's a visual example of an extended quote, okay? The world state does not want a society of deep thinkers. And then here's our quote, okay? So we went tab, okay? It's all evenly aligned. Some students like to go tab, and have this one indented and these not. Please don't do that. That's incorrect. It all needs to just be double spaced and evenly aligned. See my little red ball? It's all even here. I've also gotten rid of the quotation marks. And then look, the period is here. Not here, it's here. And we never want to end a paragraph on an extended quote. So in continuing the paragraph, we go all the way back to the margin. See how this lines up with the margin? Okay? And we continue our thought. Okay? Because you don't want to just leave a quote hanging. You want to provide some commentary about it. Right? I'm going to take a second to segue over to brackets and ellipses. I know I mentioned them before. Again, I just want to show you them in play. So if you were writing, it is evident that Finney believes in the war before his fall from the tree because he tells Jean, quote, I'm wearing his pink shirt. It originally said this here. But taken out of context, we don't know what this is referring to. So instead, we can put in brackets his pink shirt. So now the reader knows what this is referring to, okay? And we end it, end quote, parenthetical documentation, period, because this is not more than 3 typed lines. So you're going to use brackets when you are inserting your own words into a quote in order to make the meaning of the quote more clear. And what about an ellipse? So here's our ellipse, 3 dots. It is evident that Finney believes in the war before his fall from the tree because he tells Jane, quote, I'm wearing his pink shirt as an emblem. Now, in the previous, it said, we haven't got a flag. We can't float Old Glory proudly at the window, blah, blah, blah. So I took out some of that to condense it a little bit. And now it says, we can't float Old Glory proudly out the window. I cut that little bit. So this tells the reader that I am removing unnecessary words, okay, from the quote in order to make the meaning of the quote more clear or to be more concise, or maybe you have a word limit. So one of the first places you could possibly cut is in the quote, any wording that doesn't contribute to the overall meaning of your literary analysis. Okay, so now we've talked about integrating quotes, we've talked about extended quotes, the brackets and the ellipses. So now we're going to take a look at some of the quotes, 5 to be exact, from the Handmaid's Tale essays, and I'm going to show you what was done that was incorrect and what should have done that would make it correct, so that moving on with this next essay, maybe you'll be better informed. So do not do this. Offer tries to feel like she has some semblance of power, comma, here's our quote, period, and then here's our parenthetical documentation. Well, there's a couple problems with this. Number 1, this here is a complete sentence that can stand by itself. Offer tries to feel like she has some semblance of power. That's number 1. So we wouldn't use a comma. Instead, we would use a colon to introduce the quote, not a semicolon, a colon. Colon is always preceded by a complete sentence. Number 2, it says she wants to feel like she has some semblance of power, and then the quote says, it would make me feel like I have power. That's repetitive. You have to let the quote speak for itself. So maybe a slightly better way to phrase the lead-in would be, Offred feels powerless in this new society, and then show what would make her feel like she had some power. Okay, so it's a slight shift, but it's definitely more effective. And then last but not least, this period for our regular quote does not go here, it goes here. Okay, so we've moved it. So now we have a complete sentence followed by a colon, our quote, period. Example number 2. As Offred aptly states, every night when I go to bed, I think in the morning I will wake up in my own house and things will be back the way they were, period, end quote, page 199, period. Okay, so this one has 2 problems. 1, this is kind of a he said, she said approach, as Offred aptly states, and the he said, she said approach should almost always have a comma. Okay, and the other problem is this period here. Students love to double down on their periods. Period, period. Please don't do that, okay? If there's a period here at the end of your quote, eliminate it, like I did here, and just let this period stand by itself after the parenthetical documentation. Example number 3. Okay, so Atwood states, and look at the length of this quote. Okay, that's a long one. So number 1, we know right off the bat this is an extended quote. It's way too long, so we have to treat it as an extended quote. Number 2, if we're not double downing on periods, then we are adding a comma. I don't know why you guys love a comma right here. You do. It doesn't belong there. So instead we're going to say Atwood states, that's our lead-in, our he said, she said approach, with a comma. Then we tab, okay? And notice how it's all evenly aligned. We put a period, and then we put our parenthetical documentation, because the period comes first when it's an extended quote. And then we're going to continue on with the paragraph talking about this situation by going back to the margin here, okay? So I have a period here, and even if this were a short quote, this comma would not go here. Please do not put a comma there. All right, another one. One of the ants one of the aunts inquires of the handmaids, but whose fault was it? And then page 72. So first of all, this is again another of the he said, she said. One of the aunts inquires. The aunts inquired, the aunts said, the aunts questioned, type of thing. So we need a comma. And we also need a period at the end, because again, this is not an extended quote. So you might be saying, hey, but you left the question mark here, but when it was a period, you said to take it out. When it was a comma, you said to take it out. You're right, I did. But when there is a question mark here or an exclamation point here, you keep it and still put the period at the end. So eliminate a period or a comma that would be in this position, but keep a question mark or an exclamation point that would be in that position. Okay, and then again, here we have, as Offred walks through the city of Gilead, Offred proclaims how, and then we have our long quote, Atwood 25, period. Okay, so first of all, Gilead isn't a city, it's a country. So I just took out through the city of, and I just said, as Offred walks through Gilead. She, because we don't want to repeat Offred twice. So as Offred walks through the city of Gilead, she proclaims how. And this is natural flow. My words lead into the author's words. Okay, I tabbed. This is all evenly aligned. Period before the parenthetical documentation, right? And then we go back to the margin to continue talking about this. Notice I also took out the word Atwood, the author's last name, because when you're doing a literary analysis on just one novel, all of the references most likely are coming from that one novel, so you probably already introduced the author in the opening paragraph, so you don't have to keep putting the author in the parenthetical documentation, unless you're using another source. So if you're doing a literary analysis that brings in a variety of different sources to critique the work, provide some insight, then you're going to have a work cited, then you're going to identify the author and the page number. But if it's only, as in this case, the novel and you, if it's just between the novel and you, we don't need the author. You mentioned her in the opening. And there, of course, are my pups and my Sammy. The end. Thanks for joining me today for another exciting round of Grammar with G. Willie.